Welcome to Constitutions, a review of the Constitution of the United States of America. All right, so we have our Constitution. A Constitution can be thought of as a social contract between different parties, and in this case, social contracts help brings people together in order to form a civic institution. Remember Locke, as we started in the state of nature, into a social contract entered by the people that leads us to a civic existence under government, so the government now governs the people. So remember, that's the Constitution. The social contract of the Constitution enumerates the powers of the government and also puts the limits of the jurisdictions of government power in order to protect liberty. And Benjamin Franklin famously said after the convention that we created a republic if we can keep it. And no wonder most of the amendments have to do with suffrage or the selection process to maintain a republic. Now, constitutions can be written or unwritten. Most constitutions today are codified written documents. And they can be flexible or they can be rigid in the sense that the federal government's constitution is very flexible, allows room for interpretation, versus state government's institutions tend to be more rigid in the limitations of interpretation. Now, just to reiterate some things from earlier lectures, the enumeration of powers or expressed powers or explicitly stated powers, those are the powers of the national government in that they have been stated in the national constitution, while the reserved powers are those that belong to the states according to the 10th Amendment. And powers that are shared between both levels of government are called concurrent powers. All right? All right. The other one is which law is superior. The national law, the federal law, is superior to those of the state laws according to Article 6 of the Supremacy Clause. Okay, so the Constitution has a preamble with 7 different things to what the founders wanted. We the people infers popular sovereignty, or that the fountain of authority remains solely the people. A more perfect union, the idea that the union coming from the Confederacy to this system was an improvement, and over time we'll see a continuous push for a more perfect union, as repeated in speeches by Lincoln, later Obama. Establish of justice, proper justice systems to reduce miscarriages of justice. Domestic tranquility, stability and positive peace in the state. Provide a common defense, remember self-preservation and security. Promote general welfare, that's public good for all citizens, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. So this document was supposed to have enduring legacy. And we see that the United States Constitution has been the same Constitution since 1787 to now. So having a government exist under the same Constitution for so long is a fit and can show that it was a well-created document. All right, and we have 7 articles, 7 amendments. Remember, articles are what is original when the Constitution is passed or whenever a legal document is written, and amendments are the modifications, the changes that are found. And we have 27 modifications to the national Constitution. The articles primarily deal with the structures of government. All right? And so the first article, legislative branch. Article 2, executive branch. Article 3, judicial branch, right? So the articles are more interested in creating the structures of the country, right? The structures of government. And so that's what the 7 articles do. And the amendments go into other areas. All right. Now, one of the things the Constitution establishes is the idea that there are rights that require protection, right? Or that rights that we have been God-given are protected in this Constitution. Everybody has a right. Rights are entitlements that you can claim as being a citizen of a nation or an area, all right? So you can claim those legal and morally permitted claims as a citizen. Now, the civil rights and civil liberties, the way I like to differentiate the two are civil liberties have to do with government interference with the citizens. How much intrusion should government interest have on people's lives? So liberty is about protecting, civil liberty is about protecting those freedoms of the citizens against an overwhelmingly strong government, while civil rights are about the equal treatment of all citizens under the same law. All right? So civil rights is about the due process of the law being applied equally to all citizens, while civil liberty is about the nation as a whole, the citizens, making sure that the government they created doesn't infringe on their freedoms beyond a certain limit. All right, so the amendments. The articles set up the government, tell us the wishes of the type of country that founders wanted. The amendments have also a preamble, and it tells us, number one, the amendments came to prevent the misconstruction or abuse of constitutional powers. The understanding that constitutional powers can still be abused even if they have been stated. Number two, further declaratory restrictive clauses. We want to add more restrictions on government so that we can prevent them from messing with our civil liberties, right? And so, for example, the 22nd Amendment that comes in because a president went for 4 terms, right? Extending grounds for public confidence, right? The idea that this will increase the legitimacy of this government before the people. And legitimacy leads to stability, as the people are more willing to follow the government because they believe it's based on the right moral standing. And finally, ensure the beneficent ends of its institutions, to make sure that the government institutions actually do what they were created to do. All right, and so the first 10 amendments, 1791, soon after the Constitution has been passed, tell us about this story of wanting to make sure that there are civil rights and there are civil liberties that are that there's a level of protection and there's a level of restriction that provides for these conditions. And so I like to break down the first 10 amendments into 442, the Bill of Rights. The first 4 have to do with individual rights and protections. The next 4 have to do with matters of justice. And the last 2 have to do with matters of rights reserved and powers reserved. All right? Rights retained and powers reserved. And so I'm not going to get into detail, but just in passing, First Amendment, you know those, right? The right to speech, press, assembly, petition government, etc. But what I want you to take note of is the first 5 words of the amendment. It says, Congress shall make no law respecting. Congress shall make no law. In other words, the amendments are not talking to the citizens to tell them what rights they have. The amendments are talking to Congress, the government, and telling it, this is your restrictive limit. You shall not do this, you shall not do that. So when we see rights, rights are not given by the constitutions. Rights are not given by governments. Rights come from God. What the Constitution is doing is telling the government, you are restricted to take certain privileges or rights from the people, including the ability of speech, press, assembly, petition, right, of grievances. And so that is what this is about, right? Article 2, the right to have a well-regulated militia for the freedom of free state, right? Article 3, quartering soldiers. Article 4, searches and seizures. And so you can review these different amendments. 5, plead the fifth, persecution. Now we get into the matters of justice, right? 5, 6, 7, 8, right? Speedy trial, trial by jury, excessive bail and cruel punishment. All those follow through. Now, one thing I will mention is it's important to actually read the amendment, right? Not to listen to a sound bite from a news station or from a politician on the interpretation of what the actual amendment says. When you read the whole amendment, for example, I like to say, when I say, what is the Second Amendment? Most students just say, the right to keep and bear arms, or the right gun ownership. But the whole amendment says a well-regulated militia being necessary for the security of a free state, the right of people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, right? There's more to it, and its interpretation can vary over time. Right? The ninth one is a very important one, because the ninth one has been used in multiple cases in the idea that Americans have more rights than were mentioned. The Ninth Amendment says that the enumeration or the stating of the Constitution of all these rights from 1 to 8 should not be misconstrued or should not be misunderstood that Americans have way more rights than those we mentioned. So in the future, Americans can come back and say, according to the spirit of the Constitution, are there areas that may have not been mentioned, but we can say that we want or want to add to the Constitution, right? And the 10th Amendment is known as the reserved powers. In other words, anything that was not enumerated or stated explicitly in the national Constitution as powers given to the national government should be understood that those powers belong to the states and their people thereof, right? So, the key topics in the amendments, majority of the amendments will have to do with number 1, suffrage, right? So the number 1 thing that we see in the Constitution as a topic is matters of suffrage, right? Representation. Number 2, matters of justice. Right, so the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 plus, right? So about 9 different amendments have something to do with suffrage. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. About 6 that have something to do with justice. And we have about 4 definite that have to do with individual rights, right? So the individual, justice, and representation, right? Those are the key topics in the 27 amendments and seem to be the most important that the founding fathers or the leaders across time and space in America have decided were important. And we'll not go into every one of them, but those are the different parts of the Constitution. All right. Now, quickly looking through all the amendments. So we have the 12th Amendment with the process of choosing electors. Then we have the post-Civil War amendments, where the 13th Amendment ends slavery. The 14th Amendment brings the idea of citizenship, right? All those people have been freed. What is their status? They're citizens. Therefore, anybody who is born or naturalized in the United States is regarded as a citizen of the United States. It also says that all citizens must be treated equally under the due process of the law, right? And that becomes a headache, especially in the South. And so we have things like Plessy versus Ferguson, where they try to say, okay, the 14th Amendment says everybody must be treated equal, but can we treat you equal and separate? Then we have men's suffrage and 15th Amendment, the idea that all men, now it didn't say men, it's just culturally a European culture of women not participating in the public life, and therefore it was assumed in the 15th Amendment that now it was all men who could participate politically and vote. And then now we continue with the 17th Amendment. We can now vote directly for senators in 1913. Before this, there was no provision in the constitutions that Americans necessarily had to choose the senators. The state's legislature could choose the senators. Then we go to women's suffrage in the 1920s, 19th Amendment. How terms end and the ascension of power in America, 20th Amendment. The presidential term limits, as we talked about, FDR serving 4 terms, and now we needed to put that definitely in the Constitution because it was a norm. It was not a given in the Constitution. DC doesn't have representation in Congress, and the idea was, but they don't have electors. And the way Americans choose presidents is through the Electoral College. So Washington, D.C. was given 3 electoral votes on the 23rd. And then we have the end of poll taxes. We'll talk about that later, which is the idea that in order to stop the enfranchisement of the African American community in the South. All these barriers were enacted under Jim Crow, and one of them was poll taxes, the idea that certain taxes had to be paid in order to participate politically. Presidential succession, right, the 25th, and then 26th, the voting age is put at 18 in the country. Other amendments, state sovereign immunity, state equality in the 11th, federal income tax in the 16th, alcohol prohibition in the 18th and repealed in the 21st, and no increase in pay in Congress until the next session of Congress opens, that is the 27th Amendment, right? So those are the amendments of the Constitution. And so we see over time that in every generation of Americans that there's been blood, sweat, and tears. Whether you're talking about the revolution, whether you're talking about the next generation in the 1860s, where people fighting for abolition, the end of slavery, the end of human trafficking, whether you're talking about the next generation of women arguing for the rights to have equal protection in political rights and voting rights, whether we're talking about the African American community in the South in the 1960s who want greater protections from their government and want to enjoy the fruit of freedom, whether we're talking about the Vietnam era and matters of the young people and wars and executive power, or even modern issues like George Floyd and extrajudicial killings and relationships between the police or security forces and minorities like African American communities, all these generations and all these people, whether through protest, petition of government, otherwise have been able to push this idea that there are civil rights and civil liberties in the country that require restrictions on government and protections for the people. So that is a quick summary of the Constitution of the United States and the different things that we can find in the Constitution.